I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
The reality, the horrible tax bill going through. And look, I think we all knew that there was no question whatsoever that it was going to happen. I don't think anyone's shocked, surprised. A couple little wrinkles in there, however, that I got to be honest, make you kind of chuckle, make you really, really angry, and that, say that maybe this is going to be one of the greatest gifts the Republican Party has ever given to the Democrats, because this is going to be able to finally saddle the Republicans with everything that we've said that they are for the last 10 years, 20 years. They're the racist party, they're the misogynist party, they're the party of the 1%. They talk a working class game. This tax bill, front and center, shows that none of it. And here's the thing, and this is the thing that gets me. And today I spent a good portion of the morning in the state capitol here in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg. There was a hearing on a piece of legislation that I can't even believe hasn't gone through already. It's one of those moments where you go, ideologically, you could sit in a room and you could pick out by party the people who were for or against this piece of legislation. And it's called the Jake Schwab bill. Jake was a guy who worked for the Erie Transit Authority, bus company out in Erie, Pennsylvania, was killed on the job. Evidently didn't have the right tools. They used an airbag to lift the bus to get a jack underneath it. The Airbus, the thing exploded, and there you have it. No, something shot out, hit Jake in the head, and killed him. The weird thing, in Pennsylvania and in a lot of states, there is no protection for public sector workers. No OSHA protection whatsoever. And, the thing is without having any OSHA protections, these workers are look, they're left vulnerable. And at the end of it, this piece of legislation that Pat Harkins is trying to push through would give these public sector workers the ability to have some OSHA protection, so that, in the morning when they go to work, there's some hope that at the end of the day, they go home. And as I sat in the room and I watched the back and forth, as the legislators here in Harrisburg heard the testimony and went on, their merry ways, talking about, and again, it's just mind-blowing to me that you can look at the Republican Party And all they care about is, well, this is an unfunded mandate, and this is duplicating things, and this is government. We don't need government. We need insurance companies to make sure that employers keep employees safe. And I go, wait a second. I mean, that's just plain nuts on so many levels that it's one of those things that just leaves you shaking your head, going, I just don't get it. So I sat there and I listened to this testimony, and I listened to the widow of this guy talk about her husband being killed on the job, and that no family should go through this. And I listened to the Republicans on the committee throw their questions out, and I couldn't help but think that we're so completely divided that you would think, and this is one of those moments where you go, okay, why should it matter if someone goes to work for a public sector company or a private sector company or a nonprofit? Why should it matter? Why should it matter whatsoever if anyone is labeled one or the other? It shouldn't matter whatsoever. And yet here we are at a moment where they're fighting over, and it's just the weirdest thing to me, fighting over this bizarre kind of ideological positioning. A man was killed on the job. His family still doesn't have the details. There wasn't an investigation. There wasn't anything official. Look, they don't know. The police came and left, said it's an insurance company thing. It was an accident, not our problem. No one was held accountable. And there's no prevention. There's nothing to learn out of this. Nothing to learn. Nothing whatsoever. And that's the bizarre thing to me. That's the thing that just infuriates me. I go back to just the basic kind of common sense. Why should it matter if you're a public sector worker or not? Why should it matter? Job protections should be what they are. You should go to work and you should come home and you should be safe in that workplace. I mean, that's the thing that just gets me. And here's the thing. This man was killed back in 2014. This should be a no-brainer. This should be something that just went through, because it should be. And look, I talk to people who are all over the political spectrum. And when I throw this out there, that public sector workers aren't covered by OSHA. There's a general rule, and there's really nothing for the unions to fight on. And one of the Republicans said, "Well, why don't you go on strike?" And as the union leader said, "Look, we're not allowed to strike. We have in our agreement there's a no strike clause. We cannot, by rule of law, go on strike. So you've taken that tool from us, you, the General Assembly, you, the employer, it's gone." And, you keep coming back to, I think about the history. You go back 100 years ago. When somebody was killed or hurt on the job, they would have to sue the employer because there wasn't workers' compensation. Well, there was 100 years ago. Say 105 years ago. First workers' comp law was here in Pennsylvania. It was in 1950. 1915. I believe it was 1913 in Wisconsin. So you go back to 1912. You had to sue your employer. And what ultimately ended up happening was the employers, packed the courts with people that they paid off or were on their payroll because they owned the town. And the worker was made liable. Sorry, tough bid. You chose to do it. Now understand, this guy's job was to fix a bus. Had to get under the bus. They didn't have the right tool, and management knew full well that they were using this other means to lift the bus up just a couple of inches to get the jack underneath it. Well, and did nothing about it. Now, I guess maybe they've stopped. I don't actually know. And neither does anyone else. Because there was never an actual public investigation. There's no public record. The insurance company, they came in. They, tried to figure out how they're going to minimize their losses. But at the end of the day, this family lost a loved one. And one of the things that, just had the room in tears was this man had made a YouTube video for his wife, for their anniversary. And it really made it, it made it personal. It made it, that could have been anyone in that room. And that's the thing. Without this kind of protection, it could be any of us. And it doesn't matter what you do. Without having rules across the board. And I loved some of the comments by the Bureau Association and the School Board Association. Oh, it would be too expensive. It was, it's just an unfunded mandate. What were some of the other really bizarre ones that they came up with? It would just be too onerous, and we wouldn't be able to do it right. And you go, what? Explain that to me again, one more time. And it was just, one of those things that you go, at some point, don't we have to hold people accountable? Especially these employers. I mean, just on some level. And I get that it cost money, but wouldn't you think, because they kept going back to, workers' compensation does all this. I'm going, but it's really reactive. What happened to being proactive, to making sure that people don't get hurt, that people don't get killed, that families don't lose loved ones? I mean, just kind of a thought. And for me, the idea of having OSHA protections that go to all workers, and I don't care. They brought up food bank workers and nonprofit workers. They brought up all kinds of stuff that just made you go, what? Where did you pull that out of? And the reality is, we know where they pulled it out of. They pulled it out of the idiotic playbook that they always seem to use. And at some point, don't we, you, me, us, don't we have to, on some level, say enough is enough? Hold them accountable? Because think about this for a second. Just think about it logically. If you don't have a minimum standard across the board that everybody has to adhere to, this is where the Republicans might have a point. There's duplication of services, duplication of regulation. Maybe by having one universal across-the-board line that says, look, we're going to inspect, we're going to make sure that workplaces are safe, that people are not put in harm's way, and then all of the other stuff you get rid of. If there are other things, and no one really brought up a lot of things, they kept going back to workers' compensation and insurance companies. Well, both of those have ulterior thoughts of how do we save ourselves money after something's already happened. And this is where I keep coming back to that proactive part. This, hopefully, you go back to 1970 when OSHA, on the federal level, came into law. You can track from the time OSHA was passed and put into law to this day how injuries and deaths on the job have diminished over time, and how you've not just saved lives, but you've saved billions of dollars that would have otherwise been spent on injuries and care and all of that stuff. So for me, it's almost like a no-brainer. You go, you save money by doing this. It's just, for me, that simple. But sadly, you just hear the same nonsense out of the same people. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Sam Rayburn, a legendary Speaker of the U.S. House in the 1940s and 50s, offered this piece of ethical advice for lawmakers who were conflicted over whether to vote for the people or the lobbyists. Every now and then, he said, a politician ought to do something just because it's right. Wow, ethics! How quaint. Today's House Speaker, Paul Ryan, has perverted Rayburn's ethics, advising his Republican majority to vote for anything just because it's right-wing. Along with Donald Trump and Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, Ryan is now trying to push America's tax law so far to the right that it's horribly wrong. Tax proposals can be complex, but this 429-page monster is shockingly easy to understand. The Trump-Ryan-McConnell triumvirate intends to take money from millions of working families and give it to the world's wealthiest people and richest multinational corporations. Of course, when they talk publicly about their proposal, they claim it's all about helping you working stiffs. It's, quote, real tax reform for everyday hard-working Americans, trumpeted our president. In private, though, they reveal to their biggest campaign donors that the plan lets them help themselves to the people's money, giving these corporate elites a huge windfall. The biggest ever, bragged Trump. In fact, the 400 richest families in America would average $5.5 million in new tax breaks. Meanwhile, if your income is under $75,000 a year, you'll end up worse off. This is Jim Hightower saying, forget trickle-down economics. The GOP is practicing tinkle-down economics. Why would they push such an evil, shameful policy? Because it's not you common voters they care about. It's the moneyed elites who fund their re-election campaigns. As one Republican pusher of this tax giveaway to the rich put it, my donors are basically saying, get it done or don't ever call me again.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor Into. This day in labor history, the year was 1833. That was the day that prominent abolitionists convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to found the American Anti-Slavery Society. They drew a constitution demanding an immediate end to slavery. They also demanded full civil rights for people of color. These activists distinguished themselves from the American Colonization Society, which advocated repatriation of free blacks to Liberia, coming off the heels of the Nat Turner petitions, meetings, and lecture tours. These activities emphasized slavery's brutality and inhumanity and its immoral nature. They also printed and distributed anti-slavery literature like the National Anti-Slavery Standard newspaper. The society claimed 250,000 members by 1840. They formed 2,000 local chapters and published 20 journals. Founders included prominent abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, Arthur and Lewis Tappan, Theodore Weld, and many Quakers and free blacks. Fiery orators like Frederick Douglass and the Grimke sisters soon emerged as key leaders. These anti-slavery fighters endured mob violence, including riots and even murder, like that of Elijah Lovejoy in 1837. The society split in 1840. Garrison condemned the U.S. Constitution for its denial of freedom to African Americans. He and his supporters pushed for secession from the South if they would not abolish slavery. They also promoted women into leadership positions. More conservative elements considered this too radical. They split to form the American and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society. Despite this, the abolitionist movement grew exponentially. Anti-slavery ideas gained traction in new political parties.
Demanding the super rich to pay their fair share for once. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, more on the Roy Moore front. What's weird to me is he's still in this, and I guess I know it's Alabama, I get this, but the last Washington Post poll that I've seen has Roy Moore up 50 to 47 over Doug Jones. Now you've got, Donald Trump saying, "Go get him, Roy." Wow. And here's the other thing. This caught my attention, and it's one of those kind of scary things where you see that, all of this whole cesspool, especially on the right wing, it's all the same characters. And here to talk about the latest discovery in the Moore campaign, I've asked our good friend, investigative reporter, and author of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Greg Palast, to come talk with us. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be with you, Rick.
So what we find out about the Moore campaign and the ties to the past?
Ooh, I got to tell you, Moore has been hiding, but he does have this creepy guy with him called Brett Doster, who's his campaign manager. And he's the guy who's sliming all the women who said, they all made it up that they were teenagers being, harassed by this creepy old guy, right? And so who is this guy that's sliming this woman, Brett Doster? Well, I happen to have, get ready, a file on him going back 10 years, okay? He is a creep in chief, let me tell you. He was in charge of George Bush's, or actually I should say, while Bush is the beneficiary, he was hired by the Bush campaign under the direction of a guy named Karl Rove, who doesn't worry about stooping to some dirty tricks. And he was in charge of something called voter caging. This is all highly confidential and super illegal. This is a go-to-jail crime. This is Brett Doster's guy, okay? What he did was he sent letters to soldiers who were overseas. He sent letters to guys all over Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, black soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, and sent letters to black students who were away from their school for summer vacation. And what's wrong with sending a letter? The answer is this. When the letter, he said, do not forward them. When the letter came back, undelivered, he would say, those are fake voters. Now, dig this. In other words, he sent a letter to a soldier who is overseas. He sent it to their voting address, which is the Jacksonville Naval Air Station, hundreds of them just in Jacksonville. Jacksonville Naval Air Station, those guys sent in their ballots from Fallujah. Right. They sent in their ballots from Afghanistan. What they didn't know is that this guy, Brett Doster, on behalf of the Bush campaign, was secretly challenging their votes. Those soldiers' votes didn't get counted. Those black students' votes didn't get counted. They went after Jewish voters in Miami, too, because a lot of them in the summer go back north to visit grandchildren. They shut down their houses. They're called snowbirds. So he went after the elderly of Zion. You know what the thing? It's creepy. You're not allowed to come up with tricks to get rid of voters based on their color or based on their religion. And can you imagine taking away votes of soldiers because they don't know that their vote's been challenged in Florida? And it's against the law. Brett Doster, this is Judge Moore's man, and this is the game that they're playing. And here's the danger. As of next week, the law, there's a consent decree which makes this illegal, expires. They're going to be using this in Alabama. Wow. There's no question. I was just down in Alabama doing an investigation of the games being played down there. These guys are raw. Look, if Judge Moore gets elected by the people of Alabama, what can I say? That's their choice, right? Go ahead, vote for whom you want, no matter how creepy, okay? That's your choice. But don't steal the election. Don't stop black people from voting because they're color of their skin or others. You can't do that. That's not American. How about America, guys? Try the American way. What do you think?
Well, no, I mean, they want to make it great again for themselves or their vision of great again. And look, I mean, at the end of the day, you're right. If the American people choose the Orange Menace or they choose the pedophile in the cute little cowboy outfit, that's fine as long as it is the will of the people. And when I saw this report of yours, I'm going, I'm even more concerned because, look, Alabama's one thing. I mean, it's the home of a lot of the Jim Crow era literacy tests and the poll taxes, and you go down the list. This just seems to me to be a whole lot of creepy, a whole lot of, suppression and all of that.
Rick, you're right. It's a throwback 50 years. And here's the thing, okay? I was down in Alabama. If you see my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, it ends in Selma, Alabama. And I was just on the phone with a voting attorney from Selma. And look, one of the things you'll love this trick. The day after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, that was June 25th in 2013. I know it was because the next day was my birthday. Alabama passed a law saying you had to have a voter photo ID from a DMV. Like you either had a driver's license, okay, but if you didn't have a car, you had to go get one. You don't have a car, you got to drive, right? You get there. And if you don't have a car, and that's usually poor people, it's usually black people, you got to go still get this photo ID from a DMV. All right, that's not nice to add the step, but who needs it? But dig this. The next day after that, they closed almost every single DMV, almost every single motor vehicle office where you can get the ID or driver's license in the 10 black belt counties of Alabama. They said you have to go to the DMV to get an ID, and they simply closed almost every single DMV in 10 counties where there are black folk.
Are you surprised by that? Are you surprised by it, though? I mean, come on. We've done this to minorities and to poor people for generations in this country. I mean, here in Pennsylvania, for instance, I'll give you an example. What they used to do is the same thing. You have to go to the DMV. Well, guess what? There are a number of counties in Pennsylvania that didn't have any DMVs, and there are only some that are only open, a couple hours here or a couple hours there, of course, during working hours. So look, this game of making sure that working class voters don't get access to the ballot boxes is nothing new. These folks have just taken it to another level.
Yeah, and remember, look, when someone takes away a black person's vote, that just canceled out your vote, right? And here's the thing. Like in Alabama, the other thing that they were pulling off, and by the way, just so you know, when people say, voter ID, there is not one single case in Alabama, not a single one, of a person imitating another voter to cast a vote. That's the only reason to have an ID, is say, you're not really Jimmy Smith, you're someone else.
Right.
So it's a crime. You know why? Because you go to jail for 5 years for a stunt like that. So who's going to risk that for a single vote? But this is the games they play, and they knock out thousands and thousands of voters. And look, in Alabama, I was also down in a place called Baldwin County. If you look at the demographics of Alabama, and you got a lot of union workers, you have steel plants and everything else down there, that should be a blue state. And they did elect a Democratic governor named Don Siegelman. And Don Siegelman ran for re-election. He won. He won by about 5,000 votes. It was close against his current schmo, Riley, okay? Now, Siegelman won. How come Riley's in office? The answer is Baldwin County, when they heard that Siegelman had won, they suddenly said, oops, we forgot some ballots. They locked the doors of the courthouse with the ballot boxes, which are electronic balloting. That's all they have. And by the morning, they came out and they said, oops, we just found another several thousand votes. All of them, several thousand votes, every one of them for Siegelman's opponent. Not one of those ballots had a vote for any of the other offices. It was like the miracle of loaves and fishes, except with votes. And when Siegelman complained, they literally had him arrested. No one was allowed to see those machines. The poll workers, the Democrats, the press were not allowed to see those machines or watch this supposed recount. It was a straight-up, ugly steal. Most of the voters, and I want to repeat this, in Alabama, are Democratic voters. It's an old Democratic state, and they cannot. Look, there's just not enough, crazy white people to elect Judge Moore, and therefore they have to stop the majority of normal people from voting, and that's how they're doing it. They're using caging. They're using straight up vote theft. They're using ID nonsense. They're using you name it. You can't, and this caging, and they also use a system called crosscheck there. That's in my movie too. It's crazy. I tell you, Alabama is just Alabama's Alabama.
Well, Alabama's Pennsylvania too. I mean, the reality is all the same kind of things that are happening there have happened here in Pennsylvania. And to go back to what you said about not one vote, not one person being caught using someone else's ID. In fact, Pennsylvania, when they were suing to overturn the Voter ID Act here, in the stipulation of facts right at the beginning, the state of Pennsylvania admitted that there had never been a case that the voter ID law would have stopped a voter fraud. They had no knowledge of any cases that it would have stopped. There's no one been convicted or charged or any of that, yet they still went forward with it.
Well, exactly. And this other gimmick called crosscheck. Now, Donald Trump, your president, Agent Orange, claimed that 3 million people voted twice. He got that from a guy named Chris Kobach, who's Secretary of State of Kansas. Okay, Chris Kobach, this ultra right-wing freak. And I've confronted Kobach about this. He's the one who said there are 3 million double voters. If you go to GregPalast.com, you'll see that I'm the only journalist who actually said, give me the list. If you said 3 million people voted twice, give me their names. Let's go arrest them. I actually got the names. They kind of they resisted, but I got their names of their supposed double voters. And I can't make this up. They have in Georgia 268 guys named James Brown that they said voted twice because, believe it or not, they found another guy named James Brown voting in Michigan and one voting in Maryland and one voting in Arizona. Believe it or not, that there's more, they said it's all the same James Brown, even though it's James Thomas Brown, James Edward Brown, James Brown Jr., James Brown Sr. I can't make this up. They actually say that if your name is James Brown, you're a double voter, and they remove you from the voter rolls. They removed hundreds of thousands of people, including in Alabama. I went down to Alabama. Henry Sanders, a very common name left over from slavery that a lot of black people have, Hank Sanders. Hank Sanders lost his vote because they said he was registered somewhere else, that he was a fake voter from somewhere else. Hank Sanders is the senator, the state senator from Selma, Alabama, and he was not on the voter roll. This is the game that they're playing. He's the state senator, but he's also the black state senator from Selma, removed from the voter roll.
So is that the reason you think that this has been allowed to happen? Because look, if I went to the voting polls and someone said, "Sorry, your name's off the list," I would throw an ever-loving you-know-what kind of fit. Is it, in your opinion, simply because you're talking about poor and minority voters?
Yeah, because they also tell you complain. I got to tell you something. Like Hank Sanders, okay, he's a senator and he's a lawyer. So, they made sure that he made sure he got the vote. But I got to tell you, in Florida, where I uncovered that they were calling a lot of black people felons, ex-cons who don't have the right to vote.
That was 2000.
And Catherine Harris back in 2000 had 58,000 names. Not a single one. Not one was a convicted felon. They were almost all black, and I know that because it said BLA next to their names. It's in the film also. It's so crazy. I mean, you laugh, but it's not funny because it elected George W. Bush by 537 votes because they removed thousands of black people as not having as being felons. And one of the I can't use any other term. One of these cracker voting officials in rural Florida, in Volusia, said to me, "Oh, we had two boys." Of course, she called two African American men, two boys, come in, and they had an F next to name for felon. And they said, "We've never been convicted of anything." She said, "Well, if you're wrong, you're going back to jail. You're going to be convicted." Well, I got to tell you, black people in Volusia, Florida, even today, do not pound tables and make a lot of noise if they want to come out without being tasered. By the way, in that county, a black man was tasered to death by the police for giving them trouble. So, I got to tell you, yeah, that's right. Poor people, whether they're white, black, brown, or orange, it's hard to pound the table because, you're in trouble and you don't have lawyers and you don't have connections. and they intimidate you out of your vote, and they do it by the thousands and tens of thousands. And Alabama has once again, it's sad because Alabama, we're back to 1965. Alabama's where it was 50 years ago, but the rest of the country, like you say, they're using these sophisticated tactics. And in fact, this guy Chris Kobach, who's in charge of all these little games for the Donalds, is now the vice chair of Trump's committee on election integrity. Okay, that's like making Typhoid Mary chief chef at your hospital.
Wow.
You know, I mean, this is amazing stuff that this guy is going to be rewriting our voting laws, because if they let you vote, you're going to throw the bums out.
Well, I mean, as the old saying always goes, Greg, you know, if it really mattered, they wouldn't let you do it.
Yeah. You know, people say, "Oh, what does my vote count anymore?" Well, now you know your vote counts because they're stealing it. It didn't count. They wouldn't steal it.
Yeah, that's the counter,
right?
Yeah, that's an excellent counter to that. Because look, I mean, at the end of the day, you look at all these horrible policies that have been coming out, and nobody wants this stuff. And you go, who voted for these people?
Well, that's the thing. And often you think you voted, but you haven't. So we have to stay on top of it. Here's the thing. I know that here's the one thing I want people to do, though. Don't say, "Oh, Greg Palast said, man, they're jacking with my votes, so I'm not going to bother voting." No. If someone steals your car, you don't say, "Oh, by the way, here's the keys." And don't make an effort. No, you don't do that. You say, "Stop thief," and you take your car back. I mean, someone grabs your wallet out of tries to pick your pocket. You grab their hand and say, "Hand out of my pocket, man."
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So how do we do that?
Save your vote. Be very careful. And by the way, if you're in Alabama, like it or not, you better bring that photo ID. Make sure it's not expired. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. In Indiana, they had 10 nuns who walked in with good photo ID, their licenses, but they wouldn't let them vote because they said the licenses had expired. These nuns were 80 and 90 years old. Can you imagine? So they didn't expire just because your license expired. What does that have to do with whether you should be allowed to vote? It's still a good ID. The nuns were not pulling a swift con on them. But the United States Supreme Court itself, 5-4, with the right-wing 5, saying those nuns had no right to vote. They actually took on the nuns' case, and they had said they had no right to vote. This is really dangerous stuff. And now we got this Gorsuch guy, very sick. I'm very worried. So the only thing we can do is just vote them to death and vote them out.
And that is the hope, though. And this starts on December 12th with what goes on in Alabama. I'm hoping the good folks of Alabama come out in huge numbers because, look, close elections can be stolen. And we saw that in Florida. We've seen that. You know, I would argue we saw that here in 2016. You got to get out there and you got to vote. And I've always said, look, I want to go back to a piece of paper and a magic marker. I want something that can be counted. I want something that can be verified. I want something that can be recounted if need be. Not a big fan of these machines, not a big fan of all these games. But the end of it.
But the other thing, Rick, is they're stopping you from voting in the first place by removing your name. You just disappear. You're a non-person. And that's what I try to. Look, they can't steal. The one good thing about America, and this is really good, this is important, they can't steal all the votes all the time. You know, and I was never a big fan of Obama, but you know what? The way he won, because I was writing for Rolling Stone, and I contacted him with my co-writer Bobby Kennedy, and said, you know what's going on here? And he was not too concerned about the vote suppression. He just said, well, if they steal 7 million votes, then we just got to get 8 million more people voting. There's overwhelm the steal. They're going to steal some, so then that should get you more motivated to do the right thing. I don't care whether you vote for more or less. I just want you to vote and not let them steal your vote. That's about as simple as it gets. And go to gregpalast.com, unstupid yourself about what's going on with American democracy, and there you are.
Yeah, good stuff, and I hope people will check out your movie as well. All of that stuff. Greg, it's always great talking with you. Always great information.
Rick, you got the truth. I love listening to you, and I love talking to you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Good stuff, Greg Palast. Check out his website. GregPalast.com. We'll get a link at TheRickSmithShow.com. Quick break. Right now. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Now who'd have thought that after all, Pitbull's rock and roll would save us all. Now who'd have thought that after all, it was rock and roll?
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
In this part of America, there's still hope they'll get the shot they need to revive an industry they're not willing to give up on just yet.
Trump's EPA holds climate hearings in coal country. Winter heat wave hits Greenland and breaks records in the U.S. West. New federal contracting scandal exposed in Puerto Rico's very slow recovery. Plus, good news for breathers in Wisconsin and Missouri.
Hey, I bet there's a lot of them. All of that good news and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It was wrong for the last administration to declare war on coal.
It was a real war, and the president said the war is over.
Who won the war on coal? Was it Christmas?
I know it wasn't you or me. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, winter may be setting in, but we are still seeing heat waves across the U.S. and across the world.
Yes, indeed we are. A rare November heat wave hit icy Greenland this week, bringing rain in winter and boosting temperatures as much as 36 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. And in the western U.S., Denver hit 81 degrees, breaking its all-time November record that was set just last year.
81 degrees in Denver in November?
Yeah.
Not good.
In West Virginia, the Trump administration's EPA held its only public hearing over its repeal of the Obama-era Clean Power Plan, which is intended to limit the carbon emissions from power plants that cause dangerous global warming.
This will force many of these coal-fired power plants to close. Many more will close, which would destroy the jobs and the family livelihoods for thousands of coal mining families.
That was coal baron Robert Murray of Murray Energy, the nation's largest coal mining company. The coal industry opposes the plan, even though industry analysts say coal's global decline is due to cheaper natural gas and renewables, not regulation. On the broadcast, environmental journalist Emily Atkin of the New Republic, who attended the hearing in West Virginia, noted that the Trump EPA's devotion to propping up the coal industry ignores the millions of Americans who suffer from coal's pollution.
Communities that live near producing plants, which often are disproportionately low income and minority communities, those aren't based in West Virginia, and I would argue that they're just as impacted by the Clean Power Plan as a coal miner, and yet the EPA doesn't have any scheduled public hearings in any of those areas.
No, they don't. That was Emily Atkin responding to my question about why they decided to have this hearing in Charleston, West Virginia, and nowhere else. And she said it was because Pruitt wanted to have these hearings in a place where the Clean Power Plan had the greatest impact, but it impacts everyone all over the country.
In Puerto Rico, the Associated Press has uncovered yet another contracting scandal in the botched federal emergency response to Hurricane Maria. AP reports that FEMA has canceled a $30 million contract that it awarded to a tiny one-month-old Florida company to provide emergency tarps and supplies. But it took 4 weeks for FEMA to discover that the company failed to deliver anything. More than 2 months after Hurricane Maria, more than 1 million Puerto Ricans are still without electricity or clean water. Meanwhile, independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont has introduced a bill in the Senate to provide more than $140 billion in funding to repair Puerto Rico's and the U.S. Virgin Islands' electric grids and crucial infrastructure.
Good luck with that, Bernie.
It's focused on sustainability, clean energy, and energy efficiency. But as you mentioned, passage seems unlikely, with Senate Republicans focused on their $1.5 trillion tax cut bill for the wealthy and corporations.
Priorities.
Senate Democrats don't have enough votes to stop a sneaky provision in the tax bill that opens up the pristine Alaska National Wildlife Refuge to oil drilling. Meanwhile, the Trump Interior Department this week quietly issued new drilling permits allowing foreign oil company Eni to drill just off of Alaska's coast, starting as early as next month. But some good news for breathers. In Wisconsin, electric utility company We Energy announced it will permanently close its coal-fired power plant in Pleasant Prairie in 2018 and will move to cheaper, cleaner natural gas and solar. The company says the shift will lower prices for consumers and reduce its water use and air pollution.
I don't get it. I thought the war on coal was over.
And you'll like this one. In Missouri, your home state and also the home state of the nation's two largest coal companies, St. Louis electric utility Ameren has announced it will build a massive wind farm by 2020. And utility company Empire in southern Missouri announced it will also build its own equally massive wind farm, but it's going even further, saying it's going to retire its non-competitive coal-fired power plant in 2019, more than 10 years ahead of schedule.
Nice. Finally, something to be proud of out of Missouri for a change. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair. Don't tell me the lights are
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Still stuck on the go get 'em, Roy. So attention, honestly, attention all mall cops in Alabama. Be on the lookout for a goofy-looking guy wearing a costume, looking like a cowboy with a big hat and a little tiny pistol. He's going to be on the troll, cruising the malls looking for teenage girls, because evidently, go get him, Roy. He might take that literally. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
So what do you think of this? Go get him, Roy.
Well, the polls are dead tied, as I understand it. And then Trump, of course, avoided this. Then today, I think it was today or yesterday, he called to him because I think they're sensing he potentially could win. Of course, the Republicans are talking about what they're going to do if he wins. Well, I can tell you what they're going to do. He's going to show up with a certificate of election, and they're going to have to seat him.
Yep.
That's what they're going to do.
No, look, Trump needs that extra vote to keep him not being impeached.
Right. Well, and also to potentially do what they're about to do, which is to pass the only piece of legislation they've been able to pass in the last year.
And a horrible one at that, one that is probably I guess it's the second most unpopular piece of legislation to be considered. The first one, obviously, being the horrible healthcare scheme they tried to ram through at the beginning of the year.
Well, this one's going to be interesting, I think, in this aspect, whatever the final version is going to be, although I would say right now Mitch McConnell has told Speaker Ryan, you need to pass this just as it is. Because if they let members go home, Rick, a lot of things are going to unravel.
Yep, they're going to take a beating, as they should.
Yes, they are. And from everybody. And also, they're going to eventually find out what sweeteners are in that bill that have absolutely nothing to do with taxes that were given to bring along all the fiscal hawks.
Yeah, what happened to, and I know you remember this, what happened to the Republicans who were screaming about pork barrel spending and back rooms and fiscal responsibility? Where are those where'd they go? Did someone kidnap them?
Well, I mean, now that they have to have this bill because they've got themselves in a dilemma that they have done nothing, literally, absolutely nothing in the last year, they now have themselves to the point where they have, to have something, even if it's this piece of legislation. Now, the fiscal hawks, except for Corker, of Tennessee. And let's face something, Rick. You know why Corker didn't vote. This has nothing to do with fiscal responsibility. He's angry.
Yep.
He's angry at Trump.
Sure.
He's on his way out after all these years. He's angry at the Republican Party. But the rest of them either knew the Republicans are in deep trouble with the base if they don't pass something, or they've been given things. Senator Flake, who's on his way out, as I understand, has been given something to do with immigration. Somebody else got some kind of a right-to-life measure or something. I don't know, involving taxes. So there's going to be little things they're going to find out.
Right. The tax thing being, you know, we can have 529 college savings plans for the unborn.
Right.
So a fetus can now have a 529 plan. Never mind all the kids who can't afford to go to college, who are about to go to college. We're worried about the fetuses going to college.
Right. That's what's in there. But again, they're going to have to pass something. Now the problem with this piece of legislation too is this: there are, and it depends what comes out, but this is all based on 2026, 2021 expiring taxes.
Right.
The business taxes are made permanent. There's a reduction. There are so many things that might appear on the surface and may make people happy for a little bit. But there are things in here that are going to have long-term repercussions, including, of course, the deficit.
Yep.
And then there's the mandate on health care, which I think is going to obviously remain, that the mandatory sign-up is going to be taken out of law. And that, again, in itself, and I understand insurance rates are rising. I myself am going through an exchange drama here on the exchange. But a lot of people will view that as a tax pickup because they're not going to have to pay $100 a month in the penalty, or $150 or $160 or whatever. They'll pick that up. But then again, when they don't have health care and health care isn't provided, they're going to get into an economic mess.
Yep.
So there might be some short-term smiles, but I think there's going to be a lot of problems trying to make this work year after year after year.
Yeah, if you're sitting in Congress, you vote for this?
Well, I couldn't, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I could vote for or against it. You can come up with 1,000 reasons. I sat in Congress, as you know, for the most part, when we had 1998, the first balanced budget in generations, with us and Bill Clinton. If the United States deficit was into anywhere near normalcy, I wouldn't be as hard-pressed to vote against this. Now, I would like to have seen some Democratic powers and Republican powers combined together to make this a really true workers' relief bill, with certain limitations to not raise the deficit. But I think I'd be hard-pressed to lay this type of measure on a guess or an assumption or a hallucinatory assumption that all of this piece of legislation, people spending, is going to help bring down the deficit and stir the economy. I think this would be an easy no.
No, I thought so too. I mean, look, just the messaging alone. I understand you need the win. You got to do something. You got to go back to the base and say, look, we did something. But, you know, I keep asking, where's the Tea Party? Because, you know, every study I've seen, every analysis I've seen has come out and said, look, this isn't going to do anything to help the economy, really. In fact, Goldman Sachs is saying, you know, this is basically nothing's going to improve because of this. And it's a massive handout to the very, very wealthy, you know, the handful of the handful, not even the 1%. Where's the Tea Party? Where's all that anger? Because, you know, as everything says, 2027, virtually everybody is going to see their tax rates go up. So where are the taxed enough already people?
Well, I mean, the fiscal end, or just everybody's kind of biting the bullet on the R side because, again, they achieved zero.
Right.
A zero.
So it's just a matter of, in your opinion, it's just a matter of, you know, we got to have something, even if it's horrible, even if it's going to be terrible, and we're going to take a beating over it. We at least can say we did something.
Something. That's right. And then what will happen on this piece of legislation, I will predict this as we sit here tonight with your listeners and you and I, what will happen is They will research pieces of this bill. Ugly things are going to come out, sweeteners, special vested interest deals in there. It's all going to come rolling out, and they're going to get bad headlines. And then eventually somebody's going to stand up in the closed-door Republican conference and say, what did we do for what to get these headlines? That's what happens when one doesn't think out where they want to be, what they want to pass, what's their goal. This is what happens when you have nothing left at the end of the year.
No, I agree with you, but the thing is they screamed for years that the Affordable Care Act was rammed down their throats, and yet I look at this major rewrite of our tax code and how fast it's being done without any hearings, without any public input, and just basically railroaded right on through. Even though all of the analysis that's out there says it's horrible, it's wildly unpopular. It's like I said, the second most unpopular piece of legislation, at least in my lifetime, and yet they're still pushing this right on through.
Well, a lot of people in this business have said this old phrase. Rahm Emanuel, the former chief of staff of President Obama, is quoted with it the most: "Never let a good emergency go unused."
Right.
And in this case, it's really not going to matter because they have themselves on the edge of the cliff in a box of doing nothing. And so therefore they're saying, we can't let the Democrats win. We can't let the Democrats take control of the floor. We can't let the Democratic members run the process. And they'll do this if we fail. We will look like we can't govern. I guarantee you that's what's being said in these closed-door meetings.
Right.
Some people will buy that. Some people have been bought by riders in this piece of legislation. And then some people just don't care. They want to get it off their backs.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You've run campaigns before. This is 2018 gift wrapped in a nice box with a nice bow on for the Democrats, because this is the ability to get people screaming and hollering about how the Republicans are the party of the 1%, and how this isn't going to help working people, and they're creating a crisis, and Granny's all upset because we're cutting Medicare, and everyone knows that they're going to go after Social Security. This just seems, from a political standpoint, you pass something, but it was dumb.
Well, and there's one other thing that the Democratic side, and they failed on this, they really did a couple of elections ago. Democratic members got into the box of running away from a health care vote, okay? Some of them got into that box.
Which I disagreed with.
By that issue, right? Instead of defending.
Yep.
The Democratic side, if they're smart, can turn this now, including this tax measure, but can turn the health care right back to the Republican side where they can't run away from it, in the sense that if you're a Democratic member, you voted for Obamacare, the American Health Care Act, and let's say that my rates at that time were, $40 a month, okay? I'm on the exchange. And now rates will go up to $140 a month from $40 a month. And it goes up under a Republican Congress's time. And they pass this piece of legislation, and these rates continue to rise, and the individual mandates out, and people have less insurance. They can chase the Republicans on this issue. Republicans say, well, you voted for this. Well, wait a minute. During our time, it didn't do that. You've added inflation, you've added extra costs, and you've added deficit.
Right.
So they can actually kind of run against the Republicans as fiscally irresponsible. Not only giving money to the top 1%, but fiscally irresponsible.
No, I mean, we're literally kicking people off of the insured rolls to give the wealthy and big business tax cuts in the hopes that this time the trickle down will happen. And I think we both know that's never going to happen.
Well, Rob Portman, our senator from Ohio, said, he's been assured that this will, be spread over the economy, et cetera. But if you look at the studies, including studies commissioned by conservative entities, it simply doesn't say it's going to do that. It doesn't say it.
Nope.
I mean, that's a wild projection out there.
No, I mean,
it's not going to do it.
I'm hoping that people are calling their representatives, calling their senators, and while this is being mashed together, that some saner, rational heads stop this. But I think it's a done deal. Let me ask you last thing. Something caught my attention today. Trump's attorney said that, and it was kind of a Nixonian moment in my view. One of those, Nixon saying that, if the president doesn't, it's not illegal. Evidently, Trump's personal attorney is claiming that Trump cannot be guilty of obstruction of justice. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know how long his attorney, John Dowd, is going to last. And the reason I say that, as you know, you're talking to a person that got into problems and into trouble. And I remember I did a local radio show, Howard Monroe, WVLY, down in Wheeling, West Virginia, right?
Yeah, I know.
And I did Howard's show because I wanted to talk about what was going on with me. My attorneys just about had a coronary.
As I would have.
You got to stay off of shows. I know you want to talk. You've got to stay off of shows. Don't put anything out. I mean, they just were insistent. Basically, if I didn't follow it, they're going to drop me because, I was out there talking about things that the government will listen to, and the government will take its interpretation of it and then causes everybody to be drugged into a room. So
Right.
I get it.
Yep.
Now, here is the president's attorney doing the opposite of what mine did and encouraging him to put out a tweet in his name, written by an attorney. And when you read the tweet, even before I get to your question, when you read the tweet, it makes it look like the president was obstructing justice and knew that Flynn had lied.
Yep.
Now, the attorney explained that, but why would an attorney put that out?
Because
I
someone
thought
had to
that
finish.
was bizarre in itself.
Right, but Bob, someone had to finish last in his class.
Well, yeah, and now you raised the second issue. I thought it was one thing when he did that, and then I read this afternoon's news where he's saying, well, president can basically do what he wants. Well, no, he can't.
Yeah, I thought we settled that back during the Nixon years.
He can't. Everybody knows that. I mean, Trump's people know that. So I don't know if the attorney, maybe you're right, was last in the class, or he just loves to get some day in the sun here in the media. I don't know. But it's not healthy for the president, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, no, it's not good for him at all. And I keep saying, keep tweeting, keep doing it. The more you put out, the more, as you've said, the more that they have to use against you. And I'm keep tweeting. 3 a.m., get up in a dither and just go to town.
It's amazing. Never seen anything like it.
No, and just crazy times. But good stuff. Bob, I appreciate the time. Always
Thank
great
you, Rick.
talking with you.
Okay, thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
Up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
So now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Come on, get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Lots of good stuff there with Bob Ney. I got to tell you, one of my favorite guys. Got himself into a little trouble, yes. Did some dumb things. A little bit of the bent elbow. But, that happens. But, somebody who has been in those rooms and has a really good sense of how things are going there. And look, I look at this tax scheme. And again, what's really just bizarre to me is that for all of the wealth grab that this is, and that we know that it is, it's not going to benefit the middle class. And the Washington Post did a really great job of looking at all of the tax cut plans, back for the last, 50 years. And this is the least popular of all of them. In fact, this is less popular than when George H.W. Bush raised taxes back in 91 and when Bill Clinton pursued raising taxes and raised taxes back in the early part of the 90s as well. Actually, this one, which they're claiming is a massive middle-class tax break, is the least popular. Because, look, I think we know. There's a sense that we have already about these things. Now, when the Republicans talk about a tax break, they don't mean us. They don't mean working people. And I got to be honest, I was reading an article over at Business Insider, and they had these two Goldman Sachs analysts who basically said, this is not going to help to boost the economy really at all. And you go through, basically all of the tax policy center. You go through, a number of the Joint Committee on Taxation. You go through a number of these groups who are saying, this really isn't going to help the economy. It's just going to make it's going to make people really rich. You're going to have the really rich folks, and they're going to do really, really well. Thank you very much. But you and me, not so much. And in fact, what they're even saying, what these two Goldman Sachs analysts are saying, and look, I got to wonder if they're not going to get fired anytime soon, is that they're saying that this repatriation, again, since we've seen this movie once before, doing it again is really a dumb idea. But even they're saying that it's not going to help the economy at all, and it's going to do nothing for growth. Nothing. And you go, but hold on, I thought it was going to be just a huge inflection of cash. I thought this was Donald Trump discovering, not rediscovering, discovering Prime the Pump. Remember, he said that he was discovering Prime the Pump. He heard it somewhere on the street, thought it was a good idea, may work, kind of like it did during the FDR years, kind of like it did during the Keynesian era of this country when we had the largest middle class in the history of civilization. Because, hey, we taxed really rich people at a fairly high rate, then we took that money and we invested it in, things like roads and bridges and education and all of that stuff. And it had a reverberation effect through the economy that actually ended up going back to the very wealthy. So they did really well. The working class did really well. Society did really well. The country did really, really well because everybody wanted to be us because we were investing and had the best infrastructure and we were pursuing the best of everything. This is going to put us even further behind. We're going to have the greatest wealth class on the history of the planet. And I would argue we already have that. But as a matter of, an infrastructure that's crumbling, an education system that in many parts of the country, especially if you're in a poor zip code, is bad. Healthcare just being decimated. We're going to see millions more folks without health insurance. So all of the negative things are going to go up. All of the positive things, obviously, are going to go down. We're not going to have the money on the federal level to invest in the future. And, oh, by the way, if you're getting older like I am, don't plan on Medicare being there to help you because we're cutting hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare. And understand they are creating the crisis. It's going to happen so that they can come back and they can say, hey, we need to cut that Social Security. I mean, it's really, really kind of twisted. Now, there is one thing that did catch my attention. Evidently, in their haste, and remember, this had no hearings. The public didn't get to see any of this stuff. It was just voted on, rushed through, rammed down our throats. And thank you, Republicans, because you're going to see a leftward version of the Tea Party spring up, because this is really being, not even Tea Party people can look at this and go, no, we did something. What I find interesting and kind of funny is that in their haste, the Senate, evidently, to try and make the scoring, since they gave away so many sweeteners and they gave away so much stuff, evidently in their haste, what they forgot is that they had some scoring problems and they had to get under that $1.5 trillion number so that they could go through reconciliation, so they wouldn't have to go through the regular process where Democrats could filibuster. So what they did is, to make the math work out to where you're only going $1.5 trillion deeper into debt, they didn't do away with the alternative minimum tax entirely on corporations. In fact, they set it at 20%. So for those of you who are paying attention and keeping score at home, they've lowered the top marginal tax, the top rate for companies from 35 down to 20%, which means that a company could either decide to pay the alternative minimum tax of 20% and take no deductions whatsoever, or they could take all of the deductions possible, every loophole, every opportunity to evade all of that and pay 20% tax. You get that? Pay the 20% alternative minimum tax, take no deduction, or go through all the deductions and pay 20%. A giant oops that I'm sure in conference will be worked out. Trust me. I'm sure that they didn't mean that to happen. But I got to be honest, I find it hysterical. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Working people come to talk. And this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day federal judge T. Allen Goldsboro fined John L. Lewis $10,000 and the United Mine Workers $3.5 million. In what was characterized as a roaring courtroom scene, Lewis rose to challenge the judge to fine him whatever he wanted. The judge had just found Lewis and the UMW in contempt of court for ignoring his November 18th order to head off a soft coal strike, then in its 14th day. Judge Goldsboro had replaced his order with a temporary injunction after the government demanded a judgment that the strike was illegal and must end. Goldsboro ruled the strike was, quote, an evil, demonic, monstrous thing that meant hunger and cold, unemployment and destitution, a threat to democratic government itself. He insisted he was a friend of labor, but that Lewis should be sent to prison. UMW Chief Counsel Wellie K. Hopkins snapped back defiantly, stating that the government was seeking to break the union politically, financially, and morally. The federal government had seized the mines in May and was now threatening to run them with Army engineers if Lewis didn't order miners back to work. AFL, CIO, and Railway Brotherhoods all rallied to Lewis's defense. The Detroit labor movement vowed a 24-hour general strike in support. But by the 7th, Lewis retreated, ordering miners back to work until March 31st. Facing the real threat of the Supreme Court action to uphold the $3.5 million fine, Lewis stated he wanted the court to, quote, be free from public pressure superinduced by the hysteria and frenzy of an economic crisis. Lewis and the UMW were tied up in appeals court for months while they attempted to negotiate new contract terms. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
We have struggled. We have... We still brave. We're looking for the chance to be free. To break free.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, here's the thing. A big quote of the day. And it's another one of those actually dueling quotes. And I think I need a judgment on which one is worse. You've got Utah Republican Orrin Hatch, who said, quote, in talking about the CHIP program, I have a rough time wanting to spend billions and billions and trillions of dollars to help people who won't help themselves, won't lift a finger, and expect the federal government to do everything. Those children, those lazy children, wanting health care. And then there's Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa, who said, again, talking about, why we need to give more to the very wealthy, get rid of the estate tax. He says, I think not having the estate tax recognizes the people that are investing, as opposed to those that are just spending every darn penny they have, whether it's on booze or women or movies. When did movies go in with booze and women? I'm just not getting it. Anyway, here to talk about the insanity that we have seen and really just how far off the rails The Republicans have gone. I've asked our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So I need a vote. Which is worse? Is it the booze and women, or is it those lazy children?
I'm having a hard time deciding. I think I'll go with Orrin Hatch, actually.
Okay, so it's the lazy children then. Put those
Yeah,
kids back in the
because
mines.
What did kids ever do to him?
Maybe, I don't know, and that's the weird. Maybe because they're so small, he doesn't like them, creeps him out. I don't know.
These people have no empathy.
Isn't that?
Yeah, they're completely. It's just like you said. They're off the rails. They've been in D.C. too long. They've been in their bubbles too long. They're not meeting with their constituents clearly. Because if you have any real world experience, you just wouldn't say what they're saying.
But here's the thing, Jane. But this is the weird thing, and I blame this on the Trump effect. I have met people who would never, 5 years ago, have said the things to me that they've said. I've heard all of these things. I've heard the Orrin Hatch thing before. I've heard the Grassley thing before, but it's in whispered tones. It's in hushed tones. I believe we're in a moment in time where the Republicans truly believe that the American people are with them on this kind of just hateful, ridiculous kind of rhetoric. And this is, look, Trump got elected on this stuff. I think this is the Trump effect.
Yeah, I think it's the Trump effect, but I think that actually gives Trump a little bit too much credit. And as I've been tweeting today, this is actually like the Reagan effect. This is the Bush effect. This is the Nixon effect. This is, again, as I always say, a consequence of the Southern strategy. And unfortunately, due to globalization, due to Republican policies, due to austerity being basically, the prevailing system of government, even though we've had 8 years of a Democratic president, their opposition and Barack Obama's inability to really get through a lot of the more progressive policies that many liberals wanted to see, that's a result of years of this ideology that is like me first, and that there's welfare queens and there's 47 percenters, and there's all of these dog whistles and code words that get used to basically say, hey, we don't want our tax dollars going towards helping people that we don't like. And if that ends up being children, so be it. If that ends up being the elderly, so be it. If that ends up being sick people, we just don't care because we're all fighting over crumbs.
Yep.
And in particular, the people who belong to the white working class, that actually are in dire straits, that actually are, out of work, and don't have the benefits that they need, and don't have, strong unions, et cetera, they do feel like, screw everybody. Let me get what I can get for myself. And so that does actually breed a lack of empathy, even amongst people who actually need the services that they're voting against.
Now, again, back to that, what's the matter with Kansas? People voting against their own best economic needs and interests. And look, you're absolutely right. And I've asked the question from, last November till, just the other day, what are Democrats going to do? What's the labor movement going to do? What are progressive organizations going to do to reach out to the white working class who is clearly angry? Because, look, the Trump administration and the current Republicans are going to do nothing to help them. And all you have to do is look at this tax bill. Look at this tax scheme. Who it hurts the most? It hurts that very segment of the economy. It hurts that white working class voter as well as everybody else from there on down.
Yeah, but I think this is one of those moments where it actually proves how limited the Democrats really are in terms of reaching this demographic.
Yep.
Right? Because even in the face of, okay, hey, we've been telling you this is what's going on with the Republican policies and that you are voting against your own socioeconomic interests. And hey, we want to offer you this different agenda that doesn't have white nationalism attached to it, that doesn't have misogyny attached to it, that doesn't have homophobia attached to it, that has more, inclusivity and diversity, that isn't anti-immigrant. But they can't handle that. I mean, it's like, the coal miners. Hillary Clinton attempted to do that. But at the end of the day, and she was criticized in many ways for not trying harder, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, I mean, she knew, hey, how many more ways can I say you're voting for people that are screwing you over and come over to our side? I mean, we've been begging these people for 50 years and they just refuse to come over.
Do you write them off? I mean, is this the moment where you go, they're just never, are they fives? Do you let them go?
Maybe the Roy Moore election will answer that question, right? I mean,
how screwy is that? I mean, the fact that, just look at the latest Washington Post poll. They've got him up 3 points. It's 50 to 47.
He's surging again, right? I mean, he's being emboldened, actually. I mean, his supporters are digging in their heels even more, as we always talk about, because the more the allegations come out, the more they double down on their delusions, and the more they actually support this person, no matter how pathological he is, and no matter how much more proof comes out.
Now, another woman today actually came out.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And unfortunately, the election is a week away. Is that really going to change hearts and minds if they've already decided that, hey, this is just a vast left-wing conspiracy that's being perpetrated by the Democrats?
I'll say what my opinion of that is. Absolutely, under no circumstances could the Democrats possibly put this together. They're not that functional.
Well, and again, this is another thing that we were discussing earlier today on my Twitter feed, is that when you think about locally who the Democrats are in Alabama, and we have to be very explicit about this, because the Democratic Party in Alabama is predominantly black people. And they are outnumbered by the white majority in Alabama that is voting Republican. And so when you're talking about a matter of numbers, and when it really does fall on a color line, and has for the last 50 years in that state, if you don't have a considerable amount of white voters who traditionally have voted Republican crossing over and voting Democratic, then that state, that race is going to always stay in the red column. And when those voters who typically vote Republican cannot be swayed, even when the candidate is a pedophile, a crook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then, what can you do? What can you do? I mean, you can try your hardest to get people out that are on your side, and you can fight as hard as you can against voter suppression. But again, in some of these localities, we really are up against people who are proud to be deplorable, and they're going to vote that way every election.
Oh yeah, I've met a bunch of those. They're proud deplorables, and I'm going, really? Proud deplorable? Really? You're gonna wear that as a badge of honor and courage? Really?
They're owning it. I mean, they feel that this is their moment, and this is their guy, and this is why Trump feels, no shame in coming out wholeheartedly for Roy Moore right now. He feels like he has nothing to lose. He feels like he can attack the FBI. The whole entire Republican Party feels like they can attack children, the elderly, sick people. I mean, they are doing whatever they want to do. They are their id right now, and there's no one holding them accountable. So it's kind of hard to see what would make them stop at this point.
Is there any, from a psychological standpoint, I mean, when you see this kind of groupthink, and this is where, this is the kind of stuff that scares me, because, it's only, I only see this getting worse. I mean, there was just a story yesterday I read, there was a basketball game, I think it was Iowa, where the high school announcer, was doing the Trumpian talking about the names of the players on the other team, and how they're all foreigners and they should come back where they come from, and and deliberately mispronouncing their names, and just, you go, this is a high school basketball game. How is it possible that this is even remotely tolerated? Exactly my response.
It's a group think, like you said. It's a herd mentality. It's basically when you think about mobs, and you think about like the Stanford prison experiment, right? And that people who are given power and who are in this privileged position, as long as they have strength in numbers, they will identify with the prevailing sentiment, even if it's very abusive or oppressive or pathological.
Let me ask you about that for a second, though, because I've had conversations with a lot of poor white people, because I know, unfortunately, I know a lot of poor white people. They feel just as oppressed and put down as anyone else. And you go through this and you go, look, you're struggling. Everyone's struggling. At what point do we not come together and stop the divisions? Because look, the wealth class has always been really, really good at dividing and slicing and dicing and subcategorizing and ultimately pitting us all against one another. At some point, doesn't the light bulb have to go on to where we're all in this together at some point? Doesn't that have to happen, or am I just too optimistic, which is really weird for me? But isn't that a little bit something?
I mean, I think yes, there's optimism on the one hand, right? I mean, we want to believe that we can live up to our highest ideals, but on the other hand, we have to look at the evidence that's before us, right? And in the history of our nation, and really just the history of humanity across the world, that's just not what we see happening, right? I mean, people find a reason to subjugate another group in order to empower themselves. It happens in every society around the world. And it just so happens that in our country in particular, the majority has been, the white American, and they've had all the power for the most part. They've had all of the wealth for the most part. And so again, even when you have someone who isn't necessarily wealthy and isn't reaping all of the benefits of that, system of apartheid or like white supremacy, they still benefit from that skin privilege and that just mentality of I'm better than this other person. This is when we go back to the LBJ quote, that, if you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, then you can convince him of anything, and you can actually rob him. He'll empty his pockets for you. And that continues to be true to this day. And again, it's why people took up arms in the Civil War for white people that didn't have anything, actually because of the institution of slavery. But they still fought that war to maintain that institution that kept them oppressed socioeconomically, because at least they were still free. And in a lot of ways, we're still seeing that parallel. Obviously, it's not to that same extreme, but could it end up there again? We've seen it happen, right? And we see it happen all around the world, depending on who's in power. So it's something we have to take seriously, and we have to learn from it.
No, I agree. My problem is I fear we're almost at a moment where we're so divided that people start taking up arms again in some bizarre, twisted kind of idea, and not governments tearing apart, but just us. I mean, that's how bizarre. That's how I'm at that moment where you just go, wow, are we that screwed up?
Well, Putin is certainly hoping that we are, and Putin and everyone that assisted him in pulling off this interference with our election was hoping that we would devolve into civil war. They had been saying that ever since President Obama was elected the first time in 2008. That their sociologists and historians were looking across the world at us and going, hey, America isn't ready for this. America is going to fall apart due to racial strife and division. And how can we capitalize on what they're going to go through in response to this happening in their society? And everything they did in this election in terms of the propaganda and how they impacted Twitter and Facebook and just social media across the board was to prey on those prejudices, to prey on racial divisions and misogyny and anti-immigrant sentiment, and all of those things. They even, were using certain messages to target people that were opposed to the Black Lives Matter movement. So they were very much on top of what our sociological status was at that time and what it continues to be right now. And they are agitating. They continue to agitate. And I think what's most unfortunate is that the Republican Party is a willing participant in that. And they're actually the ones, domestically that have been continuing to sow those seeds over the last 50 years that even made us so ripe for the picking in this last election.
Yeah, and then the power of social media just made it that much worse. And this is where, kind of a last line of thought here, because, there's this social media effect that Trump has really, really mastered. I mean, if you give him credit for one thing, he knows how to rile a crowd. And I've been saying, especially to my kids, social media is one thing, but you still have to talk to people. You still have to sit across eye to eye, face to face, and be able to have conversations. Because look, there are a lot of things that people put out on Twitter or Facebook or, who knows what, that they would never say in a minute. Now, there's some who would, and they're getting to be more and more of those, but they would never say to someone's face. And I think we have to go back to having those conversations so that maybe somehow, just maybe, we have the ability to, learn how to talk to each other and coexist.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes back to the basic idea of integration. And that is why the forces that seek to destroy us do so by permeating and perpetuating segregation and keeping us apart so that we don't talk to each other and so that we don't look each other eye to eye. And so that we aren't able to develop some form of empathy for our fellow man and fellow woman. And that is what happens with social media, is that because we are so detached from the human interaction itself, we're just basically looking at a computer screen, then it is kind of easier for people to say really nasty things and kind of think in very, myopic terms. But again, it's difficult to do that when you're in a classroom and everybody around you looks different, right? This is why the racists don't want integration in schools. This is why they want to wall themselves off in these charter schools, and they're doing the tax cuts for rich people to put their kids in private schools. And so again, the more that we can bring ourselves together and actually talk to each other and use social media, use it to our advantage to actually get people together to learn about each other and to share experiences so that we can have more empathy for one another.
Yeah, charter schools. I mean, in my view, one of the worst things ever created. And I remember seeing ads. The kind of rhetoric of segregation on purpose, and because and I've heard it from black friends who have said, look, we want teachers in the front of the classroom that look like us, and we want our kids to go to these schools, and on a certain level, I kind of understand it, but on the other side, you're kind of going against the whole integration thing.
Yeah, and it happens all over America, right? It's like we always talk about this pendulum swinging back and forth. Is that when you have these moments where there's demographic change, and then you have the backlash to it, and you have the, violence and the radicalization of supremacists, then you do have people of color kind of retreating to themselves and wanting to stay within their own because, for safety reasons. And then so the segregation, again, is perpetuated on both sides. So it is really a moment where we all have to kind of step out of our comfort zones. And it can be a scary thing to do. But, again, people have been in far scarier times, right? I mean, our ancestors went through far scarier times than what we're dealing with today. And they had the courage to keep fighting. And that's how they were able to win all of the civil rights victories that they won. That now we're trying to maintain, right, and stop from, the clock being turned backwards on. So I think we have to just kind of pull, inspiration from those movements in the past and see what they did to get people together and to draw attention to what's going on.
Yeah. Last word. Marching order for the week. What's the moment? Help us. What's the marching order?
The marching order for this week is call your members of Congress. Call your members of Congress, fax them, text them, however you can, get in contact with them. Make your voice heard.
There you go.
Do not be silent.
There you go. Propane Jane, great to talk with you. I appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
Hey, you too. Have a great week.
Great stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. The talk.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
Sam Rayburn, a legendary speaker of the U.S. House in the 1940s and 50s, offered this piece of ethical advice for lawmakers who were conflicted over whether to vote for the people or the lobbyists. Every now and then, he said, a politician ought to do something just because it's right. Wow, ethics! How quaint. Today's House Speaker, Paul Ryan, has perverted Rayburn's ethics, advising his Republican majority to vote for anything just because it's right-wing. Along with Donald Trump and Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, Ryan is now trying to push America's tax law so far to the right that it's horribly wrong. Tax proposals can be complex, but this 429-page monster is shockingly easy to understand. The Trump-Ryan-McConnell triumvirate intends to take money from millions of working families and give it to the world's wealthiest people and richest multinational corporations. Of course, when they talk publicly about their proposal, they claim it's all about helping you working stiffs. It's, quote, real tax reform for everyday hard-working Americans, trumpeted our president. In private, though, they reveal to their biggest campaign donors that the plan lets them help themselves to the people's money, giving these corporate elites a huge windfall. The biggest ever, bragged Trump. In fact, the 400 richest families in America would average $5.5 million in new tax breaks. Meanwhile, if your income is under $75,000 a year, you'll end up worse off. This is Jim Hightower saying, forget trickle-down economics. The GOP is practicing tinkle-down economics. Why would they push such an evil, shameful policy? Because it's not you common voters they care about. It's the moneyed elites who fund their re-election campaigns. As one Republican pusher of this tax giveaway to the rich put it, my donors are basically saying, get it done or don't ever call me again.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Great new book out, a must-get. A good friend of mine wrote Gadfly on the Wall. A public school teacher speaks out on racism and reform. And look, we've had Steven Singer on this program a number of times. And finally in print, in nice book form, Steven has put out a great work, which is why I've got him on the line. Steven, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Rick. It's great.
So what made you put down, I know you've been doing the blog for a long time. What made you put it in a book form?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's something I've always wanted to do. It's sort of been on my list of always wanted to write a book, and I've been writing the blog for about 4 years now. And I thought it might be interesting to see where some of these articles would go if they were in a different format.
So have you taken your blog posts and created a book out of this? Is this what this is?
Yes. I took what I thought were some of my best and most popular blog posts, and I went through them all, and they've been revised. These are the definitive versions of all of these articles, and I put them out there in book form. Yeah.
What kind of response have you gotten so far?
The response has been tremendous. I am kind of overwhelmed, to be honest with you, by how much people have been talking to me about how much they like what I've been doing, how much it means to them, that there's a public school teacher out there who's willing to really to speak his mind regardless of the consequences. Because whenever we talk about education, usually we hear from the pundits, you know, and the policymakers, and we hardly ever hear from people inside the classroom.
Yep.
And that's definitely one of the reasons why I started the blog in the first place, to give people like me a voice.
You know, I've often said, you know, and look, I've been saying it for a long time. We need the most articulate among us to be stepping forward and defending our institutions. And teachers are that group. And I've been saying, you know, you look at someone like billionaire Betsy DeVos, who has no business whatsoever near a classroom, let alone as the head of the Department of Education, who oversees a lot of that stuff. And look, as I've said, you know, I want to see those voices of teachers stepping forward. But how much of the reason maybe we haven't seen it, as many of it, is the fear of reprisal, the fear of repercussions back at their schools from parents? I'm curious your thoughts.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, depending on where you are, where you teach as a teacher, what state, what district, it can be very different what kind of blowback you might get as a teacher. You are a public employee, and you are to some degree at the mercy of your school board, your community, your administrators. So, I mean, whenever a teacher does speak out, they can be putting a target on their back. They definitely can be doing that, even in the most friendly of districts. I'm lucky where I teach. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's perfect in any sense, but the people there have been very supportive of wanting to hear teachers' voices and not holding it against them, even if teachers say something that they don't necessarily agree with. And I think that's helped me be able to do this in the first place. But no doubt, teachers many would be afraid to come forward like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask is, you know, have you taken some shots maybe from the school board, a principal, over something you've written? Because, look, I know your blog is wildly popular. We've talked to you on the program before. You know, it's good stuff. Have you taken any shots from parents, fellow teachers, administrators?
Really close to home, not so much, but people further afield have tried to contact my district and complain. I've had people, you know, contact school board members or the superintendent complaining, you know, how dare this teacher say this about Donald Trump? You should fire him. And, you know, luckily for me, the superintendent and the school board have been very supportive about that, you know, saying pretty much, you know, this is your First Amendment right. You know, you can say pretty much, you know, whatever you want, just try not to make us look too bad. So I haven't seen too much blowback in my immediate district, but from out further afield, people have tried to get me fired, definitely, and so far it hasn't worked.
And how much of that has to do with the fact that maybe you're protected by a contract of some sort, anything like that?
There's no doubt about it. The union, without my union contract, I would have absolutely no ability to speak like this. Having that collective bargaining agreement is absolutely fundamental. It doesn't make it so that I can't be fired. I mean, teachers get fired all the time. I've seen lots of teachers get fired, and to be honest with you, all the teachers I've seen get fired really deserved it. But it does make it that you can't get rid of a teacher without cause. And a teacher using his or her First Amendment right to speak is not cause for firing. But if you didn't have your union contract, it's very possible you could have school board members or administrators target you and try to use these as excuses to get rid of you because they don't like what you're saying. So that I am very much pro-union. I'm not blind to unions. I know that there are issues with unions, and sometimes unions aren't perfect, just like our government is not perfect. But I am pro-union all the way, and this book is pro-union.
Good on you. The book title, Gadfly on the Wall, a public school teacher speaks out on racism and reform. I see you. You're a very white guy, Stephen. Some would ask the question, why are you talking about racism?
Yes,
you're the power. You're the white guy, Stephen. You're the
well,
oppressor.
I mean, I talk about racism because it's really essential to the story of our public school system, of what's going on in our public school system. And being a white person, you get certain liberties that other people don't get. White supremacy is real. White privilege is real. And the best thing a white person like myself can do is to use that white supremacy, use that white privilege to speak truth to power. Because there's sometimes, if I say something about racism, there are some people who will listen to that differently than if a person of color said it. Because when it comes to racism, it's really white people who need to dismantle this system, because we're the ones that it's supporting. So racism is a white issue. It's something we need to do something about. And as a school teacher who looks out for the needs of his students and their parents, it's something we have to talk about and have to address.
Yeah, and as I've said for a while, as long as you're torn apart, as long as you're pitted against one another, we all lose.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. We rise or fall together.
So what's the reform part? I mean, I get the idea that we want to talk about racism. What's the reform part? What are you talking about there?
Well, when it comes to our public schools, they're not perfect. I think they are the best system we have, but there are things we can do to change and make them better. And surprisingly enough, the kind of reforms we need aren't the kind of reforms in general that are being offered or supported in the policy debate. We need equitable, sustainable, adequate public school funding for all our schools. We need autonomy for teachers. We need to strengthen teachers' unions. We need protection from the standardized testing and school privatization industries that are like vultures feeding off of public tax dollars and really stopping many of our districts from doing the work that really needs to be done. And we need a new kind of schooling where teachers are allowed to individualize students' education without being forced to standardize their assessments. So there are lots of things we can be doing and should be doing, but we really aren't doing a lot of them now because of the moneyed interests at large.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I've had these we've had these conversations. I've had a lot of folks on the program talking about how we're mechanizing education. It's almost like an assembly line, because under the guise of, the future is all online. And I'll tell you, I'm the first person to say the worst thing that we ever did is hand a child a laptop instead of a textbook.
Oh, yes. When it comes to technology, I mean, there are many ways we can utilize technology well to help kids learn. And there's a lot of technology in my classroom, but there's definitely a danger when it comes to the use of technology for technology's sake in the classroom. In my district, we have a one-on-one iPad initiative. All the students have iPads that they take home. They take them to class every day, and that causes some issues. It's difficult for the students to know when to use it correctly, how to use it correctly, and not to make it a digital babysitter. And at the same time, you have these corporations who are trying to mold public policy so that these devices, computers, iPads, and so forth, become a mechanism for which they can profitize our students. There's something called competency-based education, also sometimes called personalized learning, which sounds great, but when you see what it really is, it's not so great. it is basically stealth assessment, standardized tests, little standardized tests being given to students every day. And they try to make it look like a video game. But really, it's just these tiny little standardized tests aligned to the Common Core that they use for the same way that they use the big standardized test. And at the same time, they use these same sorts of apps and software programs to data mine our children, to steal information from them and use and sell to commercial interests. So it's definitely something that needs to be monitored and regulated because it's the Wild West right now.
Yeah, and the moneyed interests are the ones that are winning out. So, let me ask you kind of the last line of questioning in this, because, you've written this great book and you've been doing this work for years of making parents like me aware of things that are going on, much like the data mining and the daily standardized tests, which we had talked about a couple of years ago. What are you hoping comes out of this book? What are you hoping the conversation turns to, if anything?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what to hope for, other than that people will hear what it is I have to say, that it might wake some people up, that some people might say, "Wow, is this really happening? I need to look more into this," or someone will find something and kind of get stoked to act, to become an activist, to say, this is happening and I have to do something. I have to do something about it. The book is called Gadfly on the Wall, just like my blog is called Gadfly on the Wall, and I picked that name on purpose. The on the wall part comes from, I'm in the school district, I'm like a fly on the wall, I get to see the things the public doesn't generally get to see. But the gadfly part comes from Socrates, one of my personal heroes. He would go around Athens and he would basically, piss people off. Right? He would talk to people and ask them questions, and when they were done talking to him, they'd be really angry, and they wouldn't know what to do with that anger. And he said that he saw himself as a gadfly on the horse of the city, that he was sort of stinging it to try to get it to move, to get it to act. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to in some ways, I really am trying to upset people, trying to get under their skin and get them to wake up and do something about this already.
No, and you're absolutely right, because I don't think people know what, I think a lot of people are upset. I think a lot of people are looking for answers. I know myself. I mean, I look at the school system, and there are things that I definitely don't like. And you talk to other parents, and they're in the same kind of mindset. They just don't know what to do and how to act. Does this help in any way to maybe focus some of that?
Definitely. The book there's a lot of questions in it, but it's also full of some solutions. One of the things I talk about and have talked about at length in the past is opting out of standardized testing. I talk in this book about what it's like to be a parent of a public school student, and my own path to opting my daughter out of standardized testing, which, she's actually just in 3rd grade now, which is the first year that she would have federally mandated testing. But even before 3rd grade, I was shocked to find out that as a kindergarten student, she was subjected to standardized tests. So I had to get in there way earlier than I ever would have expected and say, look, this isn't going to be happening with my daughter. And I think when a parent is able to share a story like that and what's happening and how you do it and the feelings you have as you're doing it, it makes it easier for someone to do. Whenever I talk to the parents of my students, I generally don't bring it up too much unless it sort of comes up. But I do let them know, look, this is, one of your options here. You got to make up your own mind about it. But, as a parent myself, my daughter doesn't take this stuff.
Good on you. And we've opted our children out as well. Long story there, something we'll talk about again. But again, the book Gadfly on the Wall, a public school teacher speaks out on racism and reform. You can get a copy of that. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Steven Singer's name. Steven, great work. As always, you do fantastic work, and I'd love to have you back again as we continue on down the road.
Thank you so much. Anytime.
Good stuff. Again, Gadfly on the wall. Pick it up. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Not right wing. Just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1833. That was the day that prominent abolitionists convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to found the American Anti-Slavery Society. They drew up a constitution demanding an immediate end to slavery. They also demanded full civil rights for people of color. These activists distinguished themselves from the American Colonization Society, which advocated repatriation of free blacks to Liberia. Coming off the heels of the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831, much of the society's work consisted of organizing petitions, meetings, and lecture tours. These activities emphasized slavery's brutality and inhumanity and its immoral nature. They also printed distributed anti-slavery literature like the National Anti-Slavery Standard newspaper. The society claimed 250,000 members by 1840. They formed 2,000 local chapters and published 20 journals. Founders included prominent abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, Arthur and Lewis Tappan, Theodore Weld, and many Quakers and free blacks. Fiery orators like Frederick Douglass and the Grimke sisters soon emerged as key leaders. These anti-slavery fighters endured mob violence, including riots and even murder, like that of Elijah Lovejoy in 1837. The society split in 1840. Garrison condemned the U.S. Constitution for its denial of freedom to African Americans. He and his supporters pushed for secession from the South if they would not abolish slavery. They also promoted women into leadership positions. More conservative elements considered this too radical. They split to form the American and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society. Despite this, the abolitionist movement grew exponentially. Anti-slavery ideas gained traction in new political parties. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So again, if you're in Alabama, seriously, make sure you mark it on the calendar next Tuesday, the 12th of December. That's when you got to go out and vote. Because I look at what came out today, the news that Donald Trump was on the phone offering full support throughout the "Go Get 'em, Roy." I got to tell you, I'm really creeped out by that, and the fact that you look at this tax scheme, and again, I go back to you should check out this Washington Post article that really did a great job of going back through the last 50 years and look at the tax bills that have come out. This one is the most regressive, I would argue, and the most not helpful to the middle class, not helpful to the working class of this country. If you make over $200,000 a year, you're going to be just happy. In fact, there's about the number that they gave was 6.7% of the population earned between $200,000 and $500,000. Just that 6.7% would see almost 27% of the gains in 2019. By 2027, the 0.6%, way up at the top, over $1 million a year, they would see 67% of all of the gains. all of the tax cuts. Again, who's it about? Certainly not about you or me. Certainly not about the working class of this country. Thanks so much for tuning in. Here's the program, thericksmithshow.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to